Going, everybody? Welcome back to the Dragon's Den, and today I'm going to be making another deck tech for y'all. Now, before on the channel, you'll see that I've already done a dragon tribal deck, being the Dragon. And I don't know if I said it in that video, but I've definitely said it in a video since then that I actually don't think that the Dragon is the best tribal dragon commander. For two big reasons. Number one, the mana value on that card is absolutely massive. So you'll spend an entire turn just trying to cast it. And if it gets removed, which is my second point, it is an absolute removal magnet. It cannot be allowed to stay on the table. You've wasted your turn and 10 mana, and now it's going to cost even more. So for the most part, the only value you're ever getting off the Dragon is the fact that your dragons are going to cost one less, and you're getting that from the command zone, which is good. But when you have a 5-color strained mana base and you have to ramp, and of course you want to play your commander and things like that, I just don't think it's worth it. So what I think is the actual best dragon commander out there is Miirym Sentinel Wyrm. It's teamer, it's not 5 colors, it's only 3. Your mana base is less stressed. It's only a 6 mana value commander versus 10. So it's much cheaper. You're not going to have to run as much ramp. So you'll be able to get into it even quicker. And honestly, you're going to be getting a lot of value off of this being on the field. And it has Ward 2, which Ward 2 is something that somebody can reasonably pay. But it is going to put a strain on your opponent's resources if they want to be able to hit this with single target removal. So it has a little bit of built-in protection. And this says, whenever another non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control, create a token that's a copy of it, except the token isn't legendary if that dragon is legendary. So, basically, you're going to be playing your best dragons in your deck, and you're going to be getting a second version of them, regardless of whether they're legendary or not. So, doubling up on every single dragon you play, considering the power level of dragons, is absolutely insane. And then being teamer, so you have that green in there, so to be able to ramp and really be able to cast several dragons in one turn, you'll get to that point. So the overall arching theme of the deck that we're doing today is dragons, but I have a couple of small sub-themes. Obviously, we want to play into the token aspect a little bit. And not as obviously, something I thought was really fun is I put a couple of clone effects in here to be able to clone your token copies of your legendary dragons, because the token copies aren't legendary, so then you can have even more versions of the best dragons in your deck. So, and then there's a slight treasure theme in here too. It's not built around treasures, but there are lots of cards in here that make treasures. So let's get into it. We're going to try and breeze through this deck. I don't have a lot of time today. We got Soul Ring. We got Gruul Signet. We got Izzet Signet. Arcane Signet. Simic Signet. Rampant Growth. Nature's Lore, 3 visits, and that's it for our actual just ramp, making more mana in a turn, but we need some cost reduction. So we have Urza's Incubator, Dragonlord's Servant, Dragon Speaker Shaman, and Herald's Horn, all giving us a discount on our dragons, because mana reduction in this kind of case can honestly be better, way better than outright mana ramp. Now, Herald's Horn is in here for 2 reasons. Not just for the cost reduction, but it also says that you choose a creature type when it enters. At the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card of your library. If it's a creature card of the chosen type, you may reveal it and put it into your hand. Now, while that's not going to be extremely just super consistent all the time, it can draw you a couple of cards over the course of the game. So being cost reduction on top of slight card advantage definitely makes it a must include. Now, we need some outright card advantage, so we have Guardian Project, drawing you cards when your creatures enter the battlefield, or your non-token creatures enter the battlefield. Garrett's Uprising, drawing you cards every time a creature with power 4 enters the battlefield. Elemental Bond, drawing you a card every time a creature with power 3 or greater enters the battlefield. Colossal Majesty, drawing you a card on your upkeep if you control a creature with power 4 or greater. Teamer Ascendancy, giving all of your creatures haste, which is a bonus. But it also says whenever a creature with power 4 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, you may draw a card. And then we have Return of the Wild Speaker, which is in here for dual purpose. I think Return of the Wild Speaker is an extremely underrated card. 5 mana instant. You can choose one. You can either draw cards equal to the greatest power among non-human creatures you control, so it can be used for card draw, or non-human creatures you control get +3/+3 until end of turn. So it can also be used to help you finish out a game if you just need that little bit more damage. Or in this case, if you do have a wide board, it can actually help you increase your power in a turn by an insane amount to be able to finish out the game. Season of Gathering, another card that I think is going to be an absolute staple in green. This is an absolute powerhouse, in my opinion, coming out of Bloomburrow. 6 mana sorcery. You choose up to 5 paw prints worth of modes. For 1 paw print, you can put a 1/1 counter on a creature, and it gets Vigilance and Trample until end of turn. For 2 mana, you can choose an artifact, or you can choose artifact or enchantment, destroy all permanents of the chosen type. So you can choose that mode and hit all artifacts and all enchantments off the same cast if you want to. Or you can pay 3 and draw cards equal to the greatest power among creatures you control. So it can be used to draw cards, hit all artifacts, hit all enchantments, pump your team. It's really, really versatile, and you can do any combination of these things as long as you're keeping it under that 5 paw print limit. So the fact that you can play one card and get so much value in so many different ways out of it, I think makes this an absolute green staple going forward. Next, we have some removal. So we have Beast Within and Chaos Warp, 2 staple cards. We're running Cyclonic Rift. We should have the mana value. Don't ever underestimate the value of a single target Cyclonic Rift. I've seen people who have Cyclonic Rift and the only way they'll ever cast it is to overload it, but that's because everybody's like, oh, overloading Cyclonic Rift, it's super cool, you return everything to everybody's hands. While that is really, really good, it is very easy to lose a game if you screw up and let somebody do something when you had the 2 mana, or you didn't have enough to overload it and you weren't willing to commit to a single target Cyclonic Rift. Obviously, you want to be overloading it to win games and things like that, or to really, really set people back if they're just so far ahead. But just as a reminder, do not underestimate the value of a single target Cyclonic Rift. Vandal Blast. This is another way to hit all artifacts and get them out of control. Artifacts are absolutely crazy, and as more sets release, artifact decks are becoming more and more prevalent. They're becoming more and more powerful. I know just within my play group, there are several people who run artifact-centric decks and things like that. Artifacts matter. So having a way to keep them from getting out of hand is definitely worth having. And at worst, you can use this as a 1 mana get rid of 1 artifact, even if you don't overload it to really set somebody back. Now we want token doublers. We have Adrix and Nev twin casters. It has Ward 2. It's a creature. If you would create 1 or more tokens, you create twice that many instead. We have Parallel Lives, an enchantment that would make you double your tokens. We have Doubling Season. Now, normally, I wouldn't include Doubling Season in a deck if you weren't taking advantage of the tokens and the 1/1 counters. However, Doubling Season is seeing a reprint in Magic the Gathering Foundations as a mythic. So I looked at the prices just yesterday, and while older printings of Doubling Season are still going anywhere between like $55 to $80, depending on like the version that you choose and whatnot, the Foundations version of Doubling Season is only pre-ordering for $30. And while $30 is still a kind of a pricey card, the price point of it is already significantly lower than the price point of the other Doubling Seasons. And it hasn't even hit market yet. So pre-order prices are always higher than actual release prices. So pre-release is next weekend, then the actual release after that. So I'd say, even within the next 2 weeks, the price of Doubling Season is significantly going to drop to the point that you may be able to get a Doubling Season for anywhere between like $15 and $25. And that is definitely, definitely, definitely worth doing. And if they keep Foundations in active print for the next 5 years, because that's how long that set is going to be standard legal, you might honestly get Doubling Seasons dirt cheap a couple of years from now. So I definitely think it's worth running just because of the token aspect now. Next we have Primal Vigor. It pretty much does the same thing as the Doubling Season does, except this only doubles your 1/1 counters, not other counters like loyalty counters on Planeswalkers, and it's global. It works for everybody. However, even though everybody's getting the beneficial effect off Primal Vigor, your dragons are going to be so powerful that you're going to be getting way more value off of it than your opponents are. Second Harvest. Second Harvest is a 4-mana instant that says for each token you control, put a token onto the battlefield that is a copy of that permanent. So I guess you can say this is sort of our first like clone sort of effect, just because it sort of worked out that way. At first I was just thinking, oh yeah, let's double up our tokens. That's another token doubler. But in a sense, but at the same time, it's like, okay, say I cast some of my strongest dragons, I have token copies. A 4-mana make a bunch of dragons that are extremely strong with powerful effects is definitely worth running. Next, we have Vanquisher's Banner. This is something I had thought about earlier. If I had thought about it earlier, I would have put it with the card draw stuff, because it's a 5-mana artifact that gives your creatures of the chosen type +1/+1 and draws you a card every time you cast one. So this is really more in the card draw section of the deck, but it's still definitely, like, you need it in here for the card draw. The pump isn't important because your dragons are massive, but definitely for the card draw. Next, we have Panharmonicon. So your commander's ability is actually an enter the battlefield effect. So if you have Panharmonicon out and you cast a dragon, when it enters the battlefield, you'll actually make 2 token copies instead of 1. So Panharmonicon is great. And then whenever you look at the fact that the vast majority of the card draw in this deck has to do with creatures entering the battlefield, with this out, this will actually double up your card draw off of those effects as well. Now we're getting into some of our true clone effects. First, we have Rite of Replication, which is a 4-mana sorcery that you can use to just make a singular token copy of something. But if you pay the 5-mana kicker cost, you make 5 token copies of something. So say you have something like an Utvara Hellkite, and you cast this with kicker on it. You will make 5 more Utvara Hellkites, and that gets out of hand the turn you do it. Or 5 Scourge of Valkus, with certain effects out. This Rite of Replication, casted on the right dragon, like say Terror of the Peaks, that will just win you the game on the spot, I'm going to say 90% of the time. Next, we have Spark Double. Spark Double is a clone effect that'll come in if you decide to copy your commander with it, because that is something you can do. Spark Double enters the battlefield as a copy of something, and it's not a legendary if the permanent that it copied is legendary. If it's a creature, it'll enter with an additional 1/1 counter on it, or if it's a planeswalker, it'll enter with an additional loyalty counter on it. So you can use this to copy any of your best dragons if that's what you want to do, or you can use this to copy your commander, making more tokens when you cast dragons. Spark Double's pretty versatile and definitely worth running in this deck. Next, we have Helm of the Host, which is a 4-mana equipment with an equip cost of 5, but at the beginning of your combat every turn, you're going to make a token copy of whatever creature this is equipped to, and if the equipped creature is a legendary, the token's not legendary. So you can equip this to your commander, and another way to make multiple copies of your commander, or you can equip this to one of your other powerful dragons to give you more powerful dragons. Next, we have Conjurer's Closet. This is in here because, again, your commander's ability is an enter the battlefield effect. So Conjurer's Closet allows you to flicker one of your creatures at the beginning of each of your end steps. So you can go to your end step, target one of your most powerful dragons, flicker that, and get another copy of it. Thassa Deep Dwelling is in here for the same reason. At your end step, it allows you to flicker something, again, allowing you to target one of your really powerful dragons, flicker it, and get another token copy of it. And Thassa Deep Dwelling does have a little bit more versatility, that while I doubt you ever realistically need it, you can pay 4 to tap down another creature. Say if your opponent has a really big creature with reach or flying or something, and you want to be able to hit that player, you can tap that creature down to allow you to be able to safely swing. Next, we have Ghostly Flicker in here for the same reason. 3 mana, it lets you flicker 2 of your creatures or lands. So you have 2 of your best dragons out, and you want to have 2 more of them, and you want to have more copies of them. You flicker both of those, you get more token copies. It's simple as that. Deadeye Navigator is in here for the same reason. It has Soul Bond. The Soul Bonded creature has an ability that allows you to pay 2 mana to flicker that creature. So again, you play this, you'll Soul Bond it to your best dragon, and then every 2 mana you can pay, you can make a token copy of it. Next, we have Phyrexian Metamorph. You can have Phyrexian Metamorph enter the battlefield as a copy of any artifact or creature on the battlefield, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. So if you have something like your Herald's Horn or your Vanquisher's Banner out or something like that, and you want to copy that, you absolutely can. Or if you want to copy some of your best dragons in your deck or something like that, that is also another option for you as well. However, this is one of those where you're not going to be able to copy your commander. So a lot of these clone effects and things like that don't get around the legend rule. So you have to make sure that you're actually copying the token copy that isn't legendary to be able to take full advantage of these. Now we're going to get into our dragons. First, we have Balefire Dragon, that whenever it deals combat damage to a player, it deals that much damage to each creature that player controls. Uvara Hellkite, we brought this up, making you a 6/6 red dragon for each dragon you control that attacks. Next, we have Ganax Astral Hunter, which is a dragon that says whenever it or another dragon enters the battlefield under your control, you create a treasure token. So this does count your token copies as well. So whenever you cast this, it'll enter the battlefield, make a treasure token. Then its token copy will enter the battlefield. The first one will see the token enter, and then the token will see itself enter, and you'll make 2 more treasure tokens. Then after that, you're going to be creating 4 treasure tokens every single time you cast a dragon. Next, we have a Tarkar World Render. While this is a dragon that having 2 copies of it isn't necessarily beneficial because it gives your creatures double strike, and your creatures can only have 1 instance of double strike. So while it doesn't help having multiple copies of it, a Tarkar World Render in here, because having even 1 copy that says your dragons controlled have double strike, dealing the double damage is absolutely insane. Next, we have Scourge of Valkus. This says whenever Scourge of Valkus or another dragon enters the battlefield under your control, it deals X damage to target creature or player, where X is the number of dragons you control. You're going to be making a bunch of token copies of dragons, presumably making token copies of those, and doubling up your tokens and things like that. It is not out of the realm of possibility for you to have an absolute huge board of dragons and then play a Scourge of Valkus and then just start directly getting people out of the game with direct damage. Next, we have Laughless Dragon Queen, giving you a 5/5 red dragon creature token every time you cast a dragon, or every time a dragon enters the battlefield under your control. Excuse me, a non-token dragon enters the battlefield under your control, you make a 5/5 red dragon. Next, we have Terror of the Peaks. Spells your opponent's cast, target Terror of the Peaks, cost an additional 3 life to cast. So in a sense, it has Ward 3, but this was before Ward was a keyword. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. This is another instance where you're going to have 2 of these. You're going to be able to throw a lot of direct damage around the board, so you may not even have to swing to win the game on the spot with this guy. Drakuseth Maw of Flames. Whenever it attacks, it deals 4 damage to any target and 3 damage to any other 2 targets. So you can use this to help you deal direct damage to players or to take out smaller creature threats on the board. Old Gnawbone creates you a treasure for each damage that you've dealt with creatures. So whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. Another treasure card. Goldspan Dragon. Whenever it attacks or becomes the target of a spell, you create a treasure token, and it makes all of your treasure tokens sacrifice for 2 mana instead of 1. Ancient Silver Dragon. Whenever it deals combat damage, you roll a d20, and then you draw cards equal to the value of your roll, and you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. Clouth Unrivaled Ancient. It's going to add you X mana, where X is the total power of creatures you control that are attacking. You add that in any combination of colors, and it does not leave your mana pool in between steps and phases. So you actually won't lose that mana until the end of your turn, so you'll be able to use that mana in your second main phase. Ancient Copper Dragon. Whenever it deals combat damage, you roll a d20 and you create a number of treasures equal to the value of your roll. Cavern Horde Dragon. It costs X to cast, where X is the greatest number of artifacts an opponent controls. So this can become very cheap if you're playing against an artifact deck. And then whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you create a treasure token for each artifact that player controls. So if somebody has a bunch of artifacts, you cast this guy for cheap, you swing it, you hit somebody, you create a bunch of treasure tokens. Steel Hellkite is in here because it's whenever it deals combat damage, you can pay X and destroy each non-land permanent with converted mana cost X whose controller was dealt damage this turn. So if somebody has a bunch of goblin tokens, let's say, you hit them with Steel Hellkite, you can actually pay 0 into X on that ability and get rid of all their tokens. Next, we have Niv-Mizzet Parun. It can't be countered. Whenever you draw a card, Niv-Mizzet Parun deals 1 damage to any target, which is not the biggest reason it's in here, but it is something that can add up over time. The biggest reason it's in here is whenever a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, you draw a card. Your opponents are going to be casting instant and sorceries. It's a little bit more card advantage on a big dragon, so it's definitely worth running. Twin Flame Tyrant, excuse me. If a source you control would deal damage to an opponent or a permanent an opponent controls, it deals double that damage instead. Remember, you're going to be making a token copy of this, so you're going to double your damage, then you're going to double it again. So you're going to have 4 times damage when you have this guy out. Atsushi the Blazing Sky. The reason this is in here, it says whenever it dies, You choose one. Exile the top 2 cards of your library. Until end of your next turn, you may play those cards or create 3 treasure tokens. The reason that this is in here is whenever you play it, you'll make a token copy of it. If somebody wipes the board, which is likely with you playing a big dragon deck, at worst, you're going to be making 6 treasure tokens. If you had your token doublers out or something like that before you cast it at Sushi, it's very, very possible that you're in the realm of making an absolutely insane amount of treasures if somebody chooses to wipe the board, making it way easier for you to rebuild than everybody else. Bonehorde Dracosaur says at the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top 2 cards of your library. You may play them this turn. If you exiled a land card this way, you create a 3/1 red dinosaur creature token. If you exiled a non-land card this way, create a treasure token. So, this gives you some impulsive card draw, exiling the top 2 of your library and allowing you to play them, but it can also make you some 3/1s to help your board go a little bit wider, even though they're not dragons. 3/1s, free 3/1s are nothing to complain about, or also creating you treasure tokens, which is, we've established, is a really good thing. Scourge of the Throne, flying and dethrone, and whenever Scourge of the Throne attacks for the first time each turn, if it's attacking the player with the most life or tied for the most life, untap all attacking creatures. After this phase, there's an additional combat phase. So the way you want to do this is with your token copy, go to your first combat, swing Scourge of the Throne. Swing it at the player with the most life. Do not swing your token copy. Untap all your creatures. Go to your second combat, swing all of your stuff again. Swing your second Scourge of the Throne at the player with the most life. Untap all your stuff. Get a third combat. So this can give you 3 combats per turn for free. Next we have Hellkite Tyrant. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, gain control of all artifacts that player controls at the beginning of your upkeep. If you control 20 or more artifacts, you win the game. With the amount of treasure possibilities in this deck and stealing your opponent's artifacts on top of that, it is very, very, very possible that this is something that can be an alternate win condition. Now, at this point in the video, or whenever I was making this deck list, I'd got through everything I knew I 100% wanted to be running in this deck. And I was like, well, I need to find like 6 or so more cards. And I didn't want to just throw in some other mediocre dragons in here because I really wanted to have the best of the best dragons in here, at least for this theme of this deck and everything else. So I was like, let me go through and get some more cards that either synergize really, really well with what I have or can help me further my strategy. So first we have, excuse me. Let's go ahead and fix that. First we have Dragon Tempest. Whenever a creature with flying enters the battlefield under your control, it gains haste until end of turn. So giving all of your dragons haste because all of your dragons have flying. Whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under your control, it deals X damage to any target where X is the number of dragons you control. For a 2-mana enchantment, you're going to be having a lot of dragons, you're going to be making a lot of dragons, you're going to deal a lot of direct damage on top of giving all your dragons haste. Sarkhan Soul of Flame, 3 mana. It's another piece of cost reduction, which is really good. Whenever a dragon enters the battlefield under your control, you may have Sarkhan Soul of Flame become a copy of that until end of turn, except its name is Sarkhan Soul of Flame, and it's legendary in addition to its other types. So this is something that you can have it become a copy of your best dragons you play, the turn you play them. So go back and look at all of your stuff like Balefire Dragon, Uvara Hellkite, Lathless. There's lots of things in here. It's like, oh yeah, having this become a copy of that is going to be extremely good, even if it is just until end of turn. Next we have Astral Dragon, which is a... It has an ability that says whenever Astral Dragon enters the battlefield, create 2 tokens that are copies of target non-creature permanent, except they're 3 tree dragon creatures in addition to their other types, and they still have flying. So it essentially gives you 2 3/3 dragons when it enters, which on its face value is pretty decent, but then the fact that you can actually copy some of your best things, like your Herald's Horn giving you more cost reduction, your Vanquisher's Banner, your card draw engines, things like that, your Dragon Tempest, and having those be on dragons and they see each other enter and things like that, it can get absolutely nutty being able to copy things like that. Next we have Savage Vent Maul, which gives you 6 mana when it attacks and you don't lose that mana. Aggravated Assault is in here because it combos really well with Klauth and Savage Vent Maul, giving you infinite combats. I don't think I need to tell you why infinite combats with big dragons is really good. And the last card we've put in here is Peregrine Drake. Peregrine, I know it's a Drake and not a dragon, so it's kind of funny because it's like, haha, you wish you were a dragon. But it's in here because I'm running Deadeye Navigator to be able to flicker a bunch of my big dragons already, to be able to get more copies of them, because Deadeye Navigator in here on its own is extremely powerful. So I was like, all right, I need one more card in this deck. And there were some other cards you could probably put in here. But I was like, actually, I think I'm going to go with Peregrine Drake. Because putting Peregrine Drake in here, if I happen to have the Deadeye Navigator out, can give you like a sneaky kind of infinite. It makes infinite mana. So to be able to have infinite mana just out of nowhere in a deck like this, where if you have the right cards out, you can use that infinite mana and absolutely win on the spot. Or you can have that, having infinite mana with the kind of card draw that's in this deck and everything else, it is very possible that if you make the infinite mana, you are winning the turn you do it. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. So that does actually put 2 infinite combos in this deck with the infinite combats and having infinite mana. While there is no tutors and things like that, and those are not anywhere close to the main ways to win with this deck, the main way to win is to play a bunch of big dragons and hit people with big dragons. Having those sneaky infinite combos in here to be able to win out of nowhere is definitely, I think, some decent value. So that being said, that's today's deck list. I definitely think this is a superior dragon deck to the one that I presented to y'all several months ago. And with that being said, if I was going to build one or the other, I would build this one. I think this one is much stronger. It's going to be much more consistent. It'll win more often. Now, this isn't necessarily a cheap deck. I don't think it's just the most casual thing in the world. I definitely think that this isn't a deck I've personally played, but it is a deck list that I think that just based on its parts will be an absolute powerhouse, especially at casual tables. This is not a CDH deck, but I definitely think that once you get this thing going, and you'll be able to do that rather consistently, that this is maybe a high 8. So it is definitely a really, really powerful deck. That being said, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you liked it. I hope you think dragons are cool. And I'll catch you next time.